From my perspective, the 2010s represent a new golden age in the comic book medium. This is the time from 2010 to 2019 when some very awesome things were put out there by publishers, big and small. So in honor of this great decade, I'm going to do a special report called The Top 20 Comics of the 2010s. But before we get into that list, let's look at some of the biggest things that happened in the comic book industry in the 2010s, shall we? And that starts with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The MCU, which started in 2008, dominated the whole decade, scored its first billion-dollar movie in 2012, and Endgame stands as the highest grossing movie of all time of any genre. And all of these high-grossing, acclaimed movies have comic book origins. The Infinity Saga borrowed heavily from the Thanos Quest from 1990 and the Infinity Gauntlet miniseries from 1991. So yes, the printed comics have fed directly to the live-action movies that so many people love. And these media companies are already developing projects that came from comics from the 2010s already, with plenty more to come, and it'll be great. The 2010s can be summed up in one word: diversity. You had female characters, persons of color, and LGBT characters taking leading roles that you have never saw before. For example, Harley Quinn has been around since 1993, but the 2010s is when she became a truly independent character, separate from the Joker. In 2011, they added her to the Suicide Squad, so she was not just headlining her own title, but headlining that title as well. Her 2011 addition to the Suicide Squad was the catalyst for the 2016 Suicide Squad movie getting made in the first place. In 2014, they put out a new Thor #1 in which Thor Odinson was no longer worthy and the hammer was picked up by Jane Foster. This will be the inspiration for the 4th installment of the Thor live-action movie series. And then there's Jessica Jones, who was a pretty obscure character created in 2001, but she had a very successful live-action Netflix series starting in 2015. One of the biggest upgrades of this decade was the character Carol Danvers getting upgraded from Miss Marvel looking like this to Captain Marvel and looking like this in 2012. And that was the inspiration for the MCU Captain Marvel, who starred in her own movie in 2019, which made $1 billion at the box office. One of the highest profile new characters that was introduced as a person of color was Miles Morales. He was first introduced in comics in 2011, but proved so popular that he was the star of a 2018 animated feature which won an Oscar. Into the Spider-Verse is a great movie. Some of the best new characters of color were also female, like Kamala Khan, who was first introduced in 2013 as the new Miss Marvel. Moon Girl, introduced in 2015, is African American. Jessica Cruz, introduced in 2014, is a Green Lantern and Latina. Riri Williams from the Iron Man universe was introduced in 2016, now known as Ironheart, and she is African American. Dr. Aphra from the Star Wars universe was introduced in 2015 in the pages of Darth Vader, and she is depicted as being Asian. And Naomi, introduced in DC in 2019, is African American. As for LGBT characters, America Chavez, also known as Miss America, was introduced in September of 2011. This is a Latin female character that is depicted as being queer from the beginning. And then there's North Star of the Team Alpha Flight out of the X-Men universe. He was the first openly gay character back in 1992, but they finally married him off to his boyfriend in the year 2012. I'm very aware that there's an anti-diversity backlash out there, but this shift is spreading the comic book genre to all types of different demographics. So if you love this stuff, why would you not want to expand it? So if you're here to hate on this movement, here are rocks. Go kick them. Another big thing that happened in the 2010s was that independent comics really flourished, with the creator-owned imprint Image Comics solidifying itself as the 3rd largest publisher after Marvel and DC, and shoring up tons of critical acclaim and dominating the Eisners. That's the Oscars of the comic book industry. So in the 2010s, female characters really stood out as lead characters and were not dependent on male characters to define them. Of the top 20 comics on my list, 12 of them have a female character that's either the lead or co-lead. As for characters of color, 7 of my top 20 have a lead or co-lead that is a person of color. As for independent publishers, 10 of the top 20 are not from Marvel or DC. The actual breakdown looks like this: 7 are from Image, 5 are from Marvel, 5 are from DC, 1 is from Valiant, 1 is from Dark Horse, and 1 is from Aspen Publishing. And before we get into the top 20, let's get into some rules of how this was copulated. Rule number 1, this is for material that was first published in the comic book format in North America. So no graphic novels or comic strips or magazines or anything like that. Rule number 2, no anime or manga. That's a whole different category. However, there are some comics on my list that are influenced by them. Rule number 3, the entry was first published between December 1st, 2009 and December 1st, 2019. So don't ask me where Chew number 1 is. It was first published in May of 2009, so it would be on the 2000s list. Rule number 4, it does not have to be superhero related. It can be real world crime drama or sci-fi fantasy that's not comic book. Rule number 5, this is about single issues, not particular story arcs, but I may mention story arcs anyway. Rule number 6, the ranking of this list is not based on what is the most valuable comic, but I will show the print runs for the first print, which may be valuable to speculators. And rule number 7, this is my personal list of what I think. I will also include honorable mentions, so this will actually be a top 30 list. Thank you for listening to my babble. Now, without any further ado, I present to you the top 20 comics of the 2010s. Number 20. DC Universe Rebirth number 1 from DC Comics. It was released in May of 2016 and it's the brainchild of Jeff Johns, who's now the de facto editor-in-chief over at DC. It's a one-shot comic that establishes the tone for the reboot of the DC Universe after the collapse of the New 52 due to its loose continuity. Rebirth is much tighter and sports some of the best writing and artist teams out there. And everything that's going on now is established here. And what's brilliant about this is it links the DC Universe with the Watchmen universe. Watchmen was created back in 1986 by comic genius Alan Moore. It was a 12-part miniseries that broke down the deconstruction of superheroes, and Dr. Manhattan was its most famous character. And it was successfully adapted into a movie by Zack Snyder in 2008. It's an incredible film. He did a great job. So before you read anything like Doomsday Clock or anything else in Rebirth, read this first. The print run is high on this at just under 236,000 copies, so it will never be worth a lot of money. 9.8 CGC tops out at about $50. Number 19. Rat Queens number 1 from Image Comics. First released in September of 2013, it's the creation of Curtis Webby is the writer and Rock Upchurch is the artist. It's the story of 4 female mercenaries told in a hilarious medieval setting of magic and wonder, and it looked like it's spoofing Dungeons and Dragons and World of Warcraft. The comedy in here is smart and funny and it's rated R, so it's described as Lord of the Rings meets Bridesmaids. It was nominated for an Eisner in 2014 and it was the winner of a GLAAD Media Award for its depiction of LGBT characters in a positive light. The Rat Queens consist of Hannah the Magician, Violet the Dwarf, Dee the Priestess, and Betty the Thief, and their adventures are laugh out loud. Despite being a fairly new character, Dee made my list of one of the top 20 black characters of all time in comics. She's a favorite of black female cosplayers, so if you saw people dressed up like this and didn't know who it is, that's who it is. It's Dee of Rat Queens. Here are some cosplayers depicting the whole team, and it looks fantastic. There was a deal in the mix to try to turn the Rat Queens into an animated series in association with Heavy Mail magazine, but apparently that fell through. But hopefully it will become an animated series one day. It deserves a wider audience. The Rat Queens number 1 first print main cover had a print run of just under 22,000 copies, and it's valued at 9.8 CGC at only about $48, which is hugely undervalued at the time I made this video. So go ahead and pick up one of those if you're an investor, and pick up the trade paperback so you'll know what's going on and start from the beginning if you're a reader. Number 18. Unworthy Thor number 1 from Marvel Comics, making its debut in November 2016, is written by Jason Aaron and drawn by Oliver Coble. This is part 1 of a brilliant 5-part sci-fi fantasy. But for any of this to make sense, you have to go back to the Thor issue number 1 reboot from 2014. This is what I was talking about earlier, where Thor has been proven unworthy and can no longer lift the hammer. But the cancer-stricken character Jane Foster is proven worthy, and she yields the hammer and becomes Thor, the goddess of thunder. This is the story that's being incorporated into the MCU in Thor Part 4 called Love and Thunder. This was revealed by Marvel at the 2019 Comic-Con, where Natalie Portman, who plays Jane Foster, was ceremoniously given the hammer of Thor. So Thor number 1 in 2014 explains that, but Unworthy Thor number 1 for 2016 is even better because it explains what happened to Thor after he became unworthy. So he goes on the quest, riding a giant goat, gets into fights he barely can win, and runs into Beta Ray Bill, who offers to help him. At the climax of this miniseries, he eventually runs into Thanos himself. This is nothing short of brilliant, so make sure you pick up Unworthy Thor number 1. Jason Aaron hit a home run on this. this. The print run on this was 70,424 copies. I can't find a 9.8 value for it because there have been very little submissions. Most people are going with Thor #1, which is selling for about $150 at the time I make this video at 9.8. We know that Thor Love and Thunder will use elements of Thor #1 for 2014, but I think it's going to use elements of Unworthy Thor as well, which would make this jump up in value. If they can do Dude Thor, they can do Unworthy Thor. Number 17. Justice League Darkseid War Special #1 from DC Comics, making its debut in April of 2016. And written by Jeff Johns. There's that name again. It's a one-shot follow-up comic to the Darkseid War, which gives us the origin of Grail. This character was co-created by Jeff Johns, and it turns out she's the daughter of Darkseid. You know, that world-ending, Omega beam blasting, big bad of the New Gods universe, who made his first full appearance in comics in the Forever People #1 in 1971, and was an inspiration for Thanos. And with the Snyder Cut coming out in 2021, we'll get to see him in live action against the Justice League. So yes, Grail is his daughter, and she has similar powers like the Omega beams. The character made her first appearance in Justice League #40 in 2015, but this issue gives you her full origin. Wonder Woman is one of the greatest superheroes ever created, but her rogues gallery is pretty weak. So based on her power set, Grail gives Wonder Woman a good arch enemy to have going forward. This book had a print run of just under 61,000 copies. I couldn't find any 9.8 CGC sales on it, but I think it's an important book that a lot of people may be looking over at the moment. With the Justice League Snyder Cut movie coming out now explaining who Darkseid is, that sets it up to potentially have Grail be the big bad in Wonder Woman 3 whenever that comes out in the future. Number 16. Bitch Planet #1 from Image Comics, making its debut in December of 2014. Easily the most provocative title on this list, so it needs some explaining. This title is written and created by a woman, Kelly Sue DeConnick, who's actually the wife of Matt Fraction, one of the most famous writers in comics. Kelly rose to fame herself in 2012 when she took over the Carol Danvers character and upgraded her from Miss Marvel to Captain Marvel with the androgynous look and the pro-feminist stance. That's the version of Captain Marvel we're getting in the MCU. It's designed by Kelly Sue DeConnick. And in Bitch Planet, she gives us something you've never seen before. Dystopian, feminist, action, sci-fi. This is told about 150 years in the future where the world appears to be a utopia, and it's ran by a small group of white men called the Fathers. And women have to be completely subservient to men, and if they get out of line, they're stamped with a tattoo called non-compliant or NC and shipped off to a space station prison called Bitch Planet. Think of it as Orange is the New Black meets Total Recall, with overtones of Pam Grier blaxploitation movies from the 1970s. The most famous character in this is Penny Rowe, a large black woman that the prison just can't break. I spoke with Kelly Sue as signing at Heroes Con in Charlotte, North Carolina, and she said that the character's name comes from Esther Rowe, who played the mother on Good Times, and Penny, the name of the character played by young Janet Jackson, also on that show. The first story arc involves the prisoners taking on the guards in an athletic event that will be streamed back to Earth pay-per-view to help pay for the prison's upkeep. So you have elements of The Longest Yard as well. This series was nominated for an Eisner Award for Best New Series in 2015, and it has a very strong cult following among feminists. There are some women in real life that have gotten the non-compliant tattoo in real life. There are also sarcastic fake ads in this that look like something from the 1950s, making women feel like they're nothing unless men find them attractive. Bitch Planet is nothing short of incredible. The print run on it was just over 39,000 copies, and you can get a CGC 9.8 for only about $40, which is tremendously undervalued. Matt and Kelly Sue have a deal with Universal Television to develop their project, so you might want to get one of these watched cheap. Number 15. The Sheriff of Babylon #1 from Vertigo, a division of DC Comics, making its debut in November of 2015. It was co-created by Tom King as the writer and Mitch Gerage as the artist. It's a mostly fictional account about the fall of Baghdad in 2003 in Iraq, about a police officer turned military contractor named Chris Henry who's investigating a murder. And I say mostly fictional because the writer Tom King actually was in the CIA and was actually in Iraq at this time. So this comic book has the street credit of being the only comic in history that has to be cleared by the CIA before it can be published, just to make sure that Tom wasn't accidentally sharing government secrets in a comic book. Tom followed this up with critical acclaim for writing Division, Omega Men, In Mr. Miracle, Tom has shown a talent for writing strong male protagonists that have to make a decision when all the options are bad. So with that resume, he got a shot at writing Batman, which he did from 2016 to 2019. As for The Sheriff of Babylon, it's a 12-issue miniseries that is painstaking, gut-wrenching, raw, and completely unbelievable. It may be one of the best war stories ever captured in the comic book medium. It has a print run of a thin 10,234 copies. At 9.8 CGC, is selling for about $110 at the time I made this video. Number 14. Darth Vader Volume 1, Number 3 from Marvel Comics, which came out in March of 2015. Written by Kieran Gillen, who's famous for Die and The Wicked and the Divine over at Image Comics. It's drawn by Salvador Larroca, and the cover is drawn by Adi Granov. It's the first appearance of a new interesting female character called Dr. Aphra. The timeline of the Vader comic is supposed to take place after New Hope and before Empire, so Lord Vader recruits Dr. Aphra for her weapon smuggling expertise. So think of her sort of like a younger female Han Solo. She travels with droids, she has a Wookiee, and in the beginning, she has no real alliance between the Empire and the Rebels. She's just out for the best opportunity. She likes to think of herself as an archaeologist, but she's just a smuggler at the end of the day. So the character is intentionally supposed to be Asian, and I was thinking that Olivia Munn might play her, but she may have aged out of the role by the time they put this in live action. The character is very funny and witty, but also very smart. Marvel spun this character off into her own title in 2016. The print run on Vader number 3 is 85,156 copies. 9.8 CGCs of this sell for about $250, but may go higher if she makes it to live action. Number 13. Lazarus, number 1 from Image Comics. It made its debut in June of 2013. It was co-created and written by Greg Rucka and drawn by Michael Lark. It's an ultra-violent dystopian tale taking place about 70 years in the future, where all the North American governments have collapsed and they've been replaced by the feudal system. You probably studied this in school in the Middle Ages Europe. It looks something like this. And all of these kingdoms are always at war, fighting for power and control with each other. And every kingdom has a Lazarus, an enhanced being that's in charge of security, sort of like a RoboCop. And in this series, we're following the Carlisle family kingdom. And their Lazarus is a woman called Forever, who's on the cover. And the king has accepted her as his most trusted ally and has given her daughter status in the Carlisle family, even though she's more of a laboratory experiment than an actual biological daughter. Forever is starting to question just how brutal the kingdom is run. Lazarus is a brilliant tale. Think of Game of Thrones meets The Hunger Games, being that the kingdoms in Lazarus are brutal to the people, just like the districts are under the thumb of the capital city in The Hunger Games. Lazarus is in development as a live-action TV series with Amazon Studios. The co-creator of Lazarus is also the creator of The Old Guard, which made it to a live-action movie, which was a big hit for Netflix. So Greg is on a hot streak right now, and it may make Amazon basically fast-track this. And Lazarus makes some very good points. What if the American government collapsed? Wouldn't the ultra-rich and their corporations step in to rule us all with an iron fist like Jeff Bezos? He's worth $150 billion. Lazarus was nominated for Eisner for Best New Series, but lost out to Sex Criminals. The print run on it is just over 48,000 copies, and it sells CGC 9.8 for about $75, but may go up if the television show pans out. Number 12. The Suicide Squad number 1 from DC Comics, making its debut in November of 2011 from Adam Glass and Federico Dall'Occhio. And even though the character had been around for 18 years at this point, this is the start of her true emancipation as a standalone character separate from the Joker. As you know, she first appeared on the animated series of Batman back in 1992 and proved to be popular enough to bring into the comic book canon. But she still was a character that was dependent on the Joker and had that jester uniform. So by 2011, she went through several redesigns and she bust out as the lead character on the rebooted Suicide Squad, which was a very dark version of this character, while at the same time she headlined her own title, which was more of a slapstick PG-13 version under Amanda Conner. Of course, the character made her debut in live action in the 2016 Suicide Squad movie, played by Margot Robbie. Harley Quinn is one of the most cosplayed, most celebrated, and most popular female characters in comics of all time. And although her origin starts with the Joker, it's not dependent on him for her existence going forward. The Suicide Squad number 1 from 2011 had a print run of just under 45,000 copies and sells for about $100 CGC 9.8. The movie franchise is getting a soft reboot with James Gunn, famous from Guardians of the Galaxy, directing. And of course, Margot will be reprising her role, and prices could go up again on this book once James fixes and repairs all the parts that were not working in the first movie. Number 11. Analog #1 from Image Comics. It made its debut in April of 2018. I named this the top title of 2018, by the way. It's a near-future dystopian spy thriller taking place in the year 2025, and this universe centers around the fictional doxing of 2020. Doxing is the practice of hacking and then publishing on the internet private and sensitive information. If you remember Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, the information he released out on the internet may have affected the 2016 American presidential election. The information that was leaked was harmful to the Clinton campaign. In the fictional world of the analog universe, the 2020 doxing was basically WikiLeaks times 1 million. So every political, economic, or military secret is available online. Any person's online bank account or medical records is all there available on the internet. So since the internet can no longer be trusted for sensitive information, the world's most guarded secrets are no longer digitized. They're printed on paper and transported by armed human couriers, like this guy. The lead character in this universe is one of those couriers, a man named Jack McGinnis. It's a rough, dangerous job because there's all types of criminal elements that are trying to get to that briefcase. So on his most dangerous missions, he travels with his sniper, a woman named Una, who's also his girlfriend. Analog is the brainchild of Jerry Duggan, and he made a name for himself writing for Deadpool. So although this is real world, you still have elements of that dark comedy, but it's more ironic than slapstick. And of course, Hollywood has come a knocking, and Lionsgate Entertainment has optioned this for a movie, and Chad Stahelski has been attached to direct this movie. He's the director of the John Wick franchise, so that should give you some idea about the potential tone of this movie. So this comic book writer, 2 years in advance, predicted a huge calamity that would affect the world forever in 2020. It wasn't the big docs, it was coronavirus, but still. If you're collecting this, the print run is only 15,183 copies, which is razor thin. The cost of this CGC 9.8 is about $50, but would go way up if this movie actually gets made. So yeah, you might want to pick one of these up as a low risk investment. Number 10. Miss Marvel #1 from Marvel Comics, making its debut in February of 2014, written by G. Willow Wilson and drawn by Adrian Alfano. And this is the origin of Kamala Khan, the lead character. She's a teenage female Muslim superhero and a first-generation American. The former Miss Marvel, Carol Danvers, upgraded to Captain Marvel in 2012, is allowing her to use this Miss Marvel name with her blessing. And yes, the character is a practicing Muslim, but it's not like she's on some crazy jihad. She's actually an awkward teenage girl who gets superpowers and has to balance her family life and fighting the bad guys. So she's more of like a Ditko Spider-Man type of character. The character is also an Inhuman, so she got her powers when the Terrigen Mist hit Jersey City one day. The character first appeared as a civilian in a small cameo in Captain Marvel 14 and 17 in 2013. She got a spotlight in Marvel Point 1 in 2014, but this issue right here is her origin, and it proved so popular that it went through 7 printings to fulfill all of the demand. The character has already appeared outside of comics and animation such as Avengers Assemble and Marvel Rising. She also appears in a video game looking like this, and Southern Asian young women that love cosplay love to play this character. The character has been proven to be so popular that she has an upcoming live-action TV show on Disney Plus coming up. I expect for her to get set up in Captain Marvel 2 first. The print run on this is about 50,286 copies, and it sells 9.8 CGC on eBay for about $250. Expect for prices to surge as we get closer to the live-action television show. Number 9. God Country #1 from Image Comics, making its debut in January of 2017. It's the first appearance of a character named Emmett Quillen, an old man from West Texas with dementia who finds an enchanted sword after a tornado hits his house. But with the sword, he's completely restored and becomes a demon-slaying superhero. The only problem is the god that owns this sword wants it back, and there's a showdown that's going to come. This miniseries uses the King Arthur archetype, being an enchanted weapon of immense power that can only be used by a chosen one. Thor uses this archetype as well. Donny Cates had been writing in comics for a very long time, but God Country was his breakout. Marvel contracted him, and he had a great run on Venom, and then an even better run on Thanos, where he created the Cosmic Ghost Rider, and he's currently writing Thor, which makes sense because he's elevated himself to the best writer in mythological science fiction horror. So Donnie's done some incredible work, but God Country is ridiculously good. It has a print run of 14,322 copies, and it sells for about $170 on 9.8 CGC, but I could see this going higher over time because the print runs so low. Number 8. Lady Mechanica #0, made by Benitez Productions and distributed by Aspen Comics. It's the first appearance of this character and was released in August of 2010. First off, the series is inspired by the steampunk community. Steampunk is basically a subculture in which people dress up in a Victorian looking style of the 19th century mixed with some futuristic looking gadgets. And Lady Mechanica is inspired by the steampunk fashion model Kato. Besides modeling, this 36-year-old British woman is a designer, singer, and entrepreneur. As for the Lady Mechanica origin, this character is found in an abandoned laboratory from a serial killer. And she's the lone survivor of some demented experiments he's been doing. It has given her enhanced abilities, and she works as a private detective, taking on cases that the police can't solve. But she has no memory of the experiments or her life before that, so she's trying to piece that together as well. So this franchise borrows from the archetype of Dr. Frankenstein's monster, which the Hulk and Wolverine, Deathlock, and Cyborg all use as part of their origin. And by the way, the artwork on here is gorgeous. It's some of the best you've seen this decade. Joe Benitez is both writing and drawing this, and his attention to detail is uncanny. For each story arc, Joe has chosen to reboot it back to #1 again, so there's a lot of confusion about what #1 is. So the #0 issue is the first appearance of this character. The print run on this is just 10,185 copies, and it sells CGC 9.8 for about $140. If this ever got adapted into live action, this price is going to explode to like $1,000. Lady Mechanica is probably the best science fiction that you're not reading, but you should be. #7. Batman #1 from DC Comics. It made its debut in September of 2011. And this is the start of one of the best runs in Batman history. The creative team shown here is Scott Snyder, the writer, who's on the left, and Greg Capullo, the artist, on the right. The most significant thing about this book is it's the first reboot of the main Batman title back to #1 since 1940. As you know, Batman made his debut in Detective Comics #27 back in 1939. Detective at the time was an anthology of many different short stories, including Batman, but Batman #1 was supposed to be his vehicle for his own title. So rebooting the Caped Crusader back to #1 for the first time in 70 years is a pretty big deal. Also going on in this book is you get the first cameo appearance of Harper Row, and you get the first full appearance of Lincoln March, two new characters you're going to be seeing a lot of in the future. Despite the other DC New 52 titles taking a nosedive in sales around 2014, Batman kept selling consistently anyway, because it was that good, and Scott and Greg were on their A game on this title. Now, I've always said it, Batman's my favorite character of all time, and that's not going to change. In the 2010s, he was portrayed by two different actors in the movies, including Christian Bale in The Dark Knight Rises and Ben Affleck in both Batman vs. Superman and Justice League. Batman is beyond just a comic book character at this point. He's a part of modern day folklore. The print run on this is an astronomically high 188,420 copies, and despite this high print run, it sells for about $120 CGC 9.8 anyway. And why? Because he's Batman. #6. Ultimate Comics Spider-Man #1 from Marvel Comics, making its debut on September 11th, 2011. And this issue gives us the origin of Miles Morales, probably the most important new character created in the 2010s. He was created by Brian Michael Bendis, who also created Jessica Jones and Riri Williams, and he writes this story. And it was illustrated by Sarah Pacelli, who made my list of one of the top 10 female artists in comics. I made a video about that. See the link in the description. The Miles Morales character lives in an alternative universe where this young character takes up the mantle of Spider-Man after the original Spider-Man, Peter Parker, dies in battle. Young Miles gets his powers from getting bit by a genetically altered spider, which is stolen by the Prowler, who's his uncle in this universe. Miles Morales makes his first appearance a few months earlier in 2011 in a book called Ultimate Fallout #4, where he dresses up like the real Spider-Man and battles the kangaroo. This is his first battle. The Ultimate Universe wound up folding around 2015, but the Miles Morales character proved so popular that they brought him into the main Marvel continuity in the comics. And as you know, he was the star of a 2018 animated film, which made him a household name and won an Oscar. The print run on this is just over 87,000 copies, and it's selling CGC 9.8 for $775. His first appearance in Ultimate Fallout #4 sells for just over $1,000 now. Despite being a new character, he made my list of one of the top 10 best black comic book characters of all time. See the link in the description. Miles Morales is a very relatable character and a real heavyweight in pop culture already. Number 5. Lady Killer number 1 from Dark Horse Comics. It made its debut in January of 2015. It's the first appearance of Josie Schuler. It was co-created and co-written by Joelle Jones and Jamie S. Rich, and it was drawn by Joelle Jones. Taking place in the early 1960s, the Josie character is supposed to be a housewife who sells a little Avon on the side, but underneath it all, she is really a contract killer. And her husband and her 2 daughters have no idea that mom is an assassin. This is issue number 1 of a brilliant 5-part miniseries. This franchise feels like you took Goodfellas, James Bond, and Mad Men and put it in the Leave It to Beaver universe. This miniseries was a big hit for Dark Horse and established a cult following immediately. A second volume of the Lady Killer series was issued in August of 2016. This time Joelle Jones was credited as the sole writer and artist. Her amazing work was rewarded by the comic book industry, with DC Comics signing her on to draw and write Catwoman starting in 2016. Joelle made my list of one of the top 10 female artists in comics right now. I made a video about that. See the link in the description. Let's face it, Lady Killer would make an extraordinary television series, and maybe that could happen because Netflix has a first look deal with Dark Horse to turn their projects into movies and television shows. Like Umbrella Academy, it started out as a Dark Horse comic first. The print run on this is just 8,431 copies, which is nothing. It sells for about $170, 9.8 CGC. But if it ever got developed, that price is going to explode due to its low print run. And this being the first appearance of this character. Come on Netflix, let's make this happen. Number 4. Divinity number 1 from Valiant Comics, first published in February 2015. This is the first appearance of Abram Adams, aka Divinity. It was co-created and written by Matt Kent and drawn by Trevor Harsan. In the late 1930s, a black infant child is found by a Soviet official and raised as a ward of the state. Fast forward to 1960, and he is the Soviet Union's best cosmonaut. It's the start of the space race against those hated Americans, and he's been tasked to lead a 3-person team to travel further in space than no man has ever traveled before. And he has to leave behind his secret wife who's pregnant. The authorities won't allow him to have a family. It's against orders. This is Soviet Russia in the early 1960s, so you do what they tell you to do. So him and his team are out there so long they lose track of time. He witnesses an anomaly which gives him the power of a god, like Dr. Manhattan type level. So he returns to Earth to find his long lost wife. The year is now 2015. The American authorities view him as a threat, obviously. So they dispatch the Valiant Universe's version of the Avengers called Unity to try to capture him. And over a 4-issue miniseries, you have one of the best sci-fi action miniseries in the history of comics. Issue number 1 was such a big hit for Valiant and kept selling out that it went through 5 printings. And it spawned 2 sequels, a Divinity 2 and a Divinity 3, where his crew members also came back with superpowers. I did a video previously about the top 10 black superheroes of all time, and Divinity got an honorable mention. Link in the description if you want to see that video. Remember, this is from the Valiant universe, and they're making movies now, and Bloodshot was the first one. So something like Divinity would be way down the line, but it would be welcome. The print run on the first print is just over 12,000 copies, and it's selling 9.8 CGC for just about $55, which is way undervalued. If you never heard of Divinity, be sure to pick up a trade paperback and read it. I guarantee you'll love it. Number 3. Saga number 1 from Image Comics, making its debut in March of 2012. It's the first appearance of this family, Alana, Marco, and baby Hazel. It's co-created and written by Brian K. Vaughan and drawn by Fiona Staples. It was the winner of the Eisner in 2013 for Best New Series and Best Ongoing Series, and it has won so many Eisners since then that I've lost count. You probably heard of the hype surrounding this series before, but you never read it because it looks so weird and you don't know what's going on. Basically, it's Romeo and Juliet meets Star Wars. The female lead is a woman named Alana who belongs to a planet where people have wings. And the male lead is a man named Marco who's from the moon of that planet where the people have horns on their head. And this planet and its moon have been at war with each other forever. Marco is captured in this war and his jailer is the woman named Alana. And despite the fact that both of these races hate each other, they wind up falling in love and they have a baby together. Both sides of the war consider them traitors and the baby is labeled an abomination and must be killed. It would be the equivalent of a black American soldier in World War II getting captured by the Nazis and falling in love with a female nurse Nazi and getting her pregnant. However, Alana and Marco are able to escape with baby Hazel unharmed, and now they're fugitives on the run throughout the galaxy trying to raise a baby daughter. Both sides are trying to hunt them down using bounty hunters, including Prince Robot IV, an AI that has a television for a head. So Saga is so weird, but so good. The writer Brian K. Vaughan made a name for himself creating and writing The Runaways with Marvel. He's also responsible for, but not limited to, Why the Last Man and Paper Girls, which won an Eisner in 2016 for Best New Series. The artist Fiona Staples was a little-known Canadian artist, but after Saga, she's big time and made my list of one of the top 10 female artists in comics as well. Link in the description. Brian K. Vaughan has a development deal with Legendary Pictures, so who knows, this could get made one day. It's considered kind of weird and maybe a little too expensive to ever get made, but no one ever thought that Watchmen would get made either. The print run on this is around 37,641 copies, and it sells CGC 9.8 for about $375. At the time I made this, Saga is about 54 issues into its run, so I recommend that you get a trade paperback to catch up on what's going on. Number 2. Edge of the Spider-Verse #2 from Marvel Comics, making its debut in September of 2014. It's the first appearance of Gwen Stacy as Spider-Woman, aka Spider-Gwen. It was co-created and written by Jason Latour and drawn by Robbie Rodriguez. It takes place in an alternative universe where it's Gwen Stacy and not Peter Parker that gets bitten by the spider, so she becomes Spider-Woman, but fans start calling her Spider-Gwen, so they created a series called Spider-Gwen, but the name makes no sense because the character has a secret identity. How could she be known as Spider-Gwen, her universe, and still have a secret identity? They would know she's Gwen Stacy. But if Marvel kept calling her Spider-Woman, it would confuse this character with the other Spider-Woman in the 616 universe. So to avoid confusion, Marvel has just called this character Ghost Spider going forward. In this alternative future, there's some changes. For example, Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, is on the police force, and Matt Murdock is a lawyer, but he's an evil one. This hooded Spider-Woman was a pop culture hit. It immediately became a big cosplay favorite. In her universe, the character is also a drummer in the all-girl punk band called the Mary Janes, and it's fronted by Mary Jane Watson, of course, and they have a hit song called Face It Tiger, You Hit the Jackpot, which is a famous line from the Spider-Man dialogue when Mary Jane first hooks up with Peter Parker. Marvel has actually commissioned a real version of this song that you can listen to on Spotify. As you know, the character makes an appearance in the animated movie Edge of the Spider-Verse starring Miles Morales. To field the demand, the Edge of the Spider-Verse #2 issue went through 4 printings, but the first print has a print run of about 54,415 copies, and it's selling 9.8 CGC for about $800 and rising. Alright, before we get to number 1, as always, let's have the honorable mention list. And here it is. Bloodshot Reborn #14 from Valiant Comics, released in 2016, is the first appearance of numerous Bloodshot prototypes and the first appearance of Kay the Geomancer as Deathmate. Superman American Alien #1 from DC, first released in 2015, is a much grittier tale of a coming-of-age Clark Kent and is written by Max Landis, the son of famed director John Landis. The Walking Dead #100 from Image Comics, released in 2012, is the first appearance of Negan, one of the best new villains of the 2010s. All New Captain America #1 from Marvel Comics, first released in 2014. This is where Sam Wilson, the Falcon, picks up the shield of Captain America. We got a tease of this in the in-game live-action movie written by Rick Remender. It's the start of a fantastic espionage tale. Sex Criminals #1 from Image Comics, making its debut in 2013. It's the offbeat story of a couple that can stop time when they orgasm together, so they use that power to go out and rob banks. This is from Matt Fraction, and it's a double Eisner winner for Best New Series and Best Ongoing Series from 2014. Black Hammer #1 from Dark Horse Comics. It was first released in 2015. It's Jeff Lemire's love letter to Jack Kirby-inspired Silver Age science fiction. It was nominated for Best New Series at the 2017 Eisner Awards. We Can Never Go Home #1 from Black Mass Comics, first released in 2015. This put the industry on notice that this tiny publisher was a force to be reckoned with. It's the best mutant story never told by Marvel. It's the story of a superpowered female Asian teen and her boyfriend on the run from the law. Hawkeye #1 from Marvel Comics, released in 2012. It was the Eisner winner for Best New Series, and this will be the template that Marvel will be using for a Disney Plus show. The Fix #1 from Image Comics, released in 2016. It's the story of 2 corrupt and bumbling cops in Los Angeles, and it's also an indictment on sleazy Hollywood excess, told in a hilarious dark comedy style. And Detective Comics #1000, released in 2019. It celebrates the 80th anniversary of the Caped Crusader, aka Batman. It's an oversized collection of many different short stories from different artists and writer teams, and is the first appearance of the comic book version of the Arkham Knight. Thank you for hanging in there with me. I know it's been a long video, but there's so much good stuff to talk about from this decade. But without further ado, I present to you the #1 comic of the 2010s. Number 1. Monstrous #1 from Image Comics, making its debut in November of 2015. It's the first appearance of Micah. It was written and co-created by Marjorie Liu and drawn by Sana Takeda. It was nominated for Eisner for Best New Series in 2016, and it won 5 Eisners in 2018. It's a mind-blowing science fiction horror epic high fantasy war story. The art style is influenced by anime, manga, and even steampunk. The story is supposed to be taking place in an alternative history of China in the early 20th century, and it revolves around a race of people who are human-animal hybrids called Archonics, and they are enslaved by humans who use them to produce magic. The lead character is a teenage Archonic girl named Micah who leaves a slave rebellion in the first issue. She goes on the run in the backwoods of China and has adventures that take her all over Southeast Asia. Tagging along with her is a young, naive fox girl named Kippa. Monsters is a very serious story, so Kippa works as the comic relief. Also tagging along is a wise talking cat named Ren. Ren's chief job is to explain to the reader what's going on. On this adventure, Micah is trying to piece together what happened to her long-lost mother. Along the way, they run into all types of mythical creatures, and Micah has this strong psychic connection to a monster with immense power. Marjorie Liu has been compared to Jonathan Hickman as a master of long-form storytelling. She's a Chinese American and only the second person of Asian descent to win the Best Overall Writer at the Eisners, and she's the first woman to win the Best Overall Writer. And Sana is Japanese, and her artwork on this is absolutely incredible. The interior work looks just as good as the covers. At the time I created this, Monstrous is about 30 issues in and still going strong. I highly recommend that you get a trade paperback so you can catch up to what's going on, and I believe that Monstrous is the best thing released in the 2010s. Monstrous #1 has a print run of just over 30,000 copies and sells for about $200 CGC 9.8. Hopefully one day this gets adapted into an animated series, and that would make that price go way up. Thank you for watching this special report about what I think are the top 20 comics of the 2010s. Be sure to speak up in the comment section and tell me what you think of my list, and drop your own top 20 or top 10 or whatever you feel like dropping. You know the drill. Be sure to subscribe to this channel, give the thumbs up, and share these videos on social media so other people learn about the channel. And don't forget, I do sell comics at my eBay page listed here with a link in the description. One Stop Thrift and Comic Power are run by the same guy. That would be me, Comic Killer 72. I have 100% feedback, by the way. And once again, thank you to my subscribers and viewers who support Comic Power. Until next time, this is Comic Killer 72 for Comic Power saying bye-bye.